everybody. Thank you all for having me today. Thank you, Jonathan. This was a really great introduction. Very appreciated. We'll talk a bit about cars, and we'll end up talking about marketplaces more broadly. There was a question asked earlier in the chat there that said, hey, are these really just fintech companies masquerading as classifieds? And this presentation is going to be giving the answer yes. Quick background on me. I originally co-founded a company called Taxi Magic back in the day. The idea was that you could push a button on your BlackBerry and a car would come and pick you up, and you could pay for it electronically. That was done a couple of years before. It was 2007, a couple of years before Uber. A bunch of learning from that and whatnot, but I jokingly say we were like the Netscape of the Uber space. You'll still see it in places like New York and Las Vegas under the brand Curb. Sold it to Verifone for the payments technology. Then went and spent some time at Capital One figuring out how people do finance over digital media, over mobile devices, and over a variety of digital interfaces. And as Jonathan mentioned, co-founded Shift with the vision of being able to enable people to sell a car from a person to a person and finance in between. Along that journey, have made some observations and done some thinking about where I see the marketplaces and really the financing role in those marketplaces going, and then how some of the dynamics that you've been hearing about will play out. So, but I'm going to go way back and start in the simple terms of thinking about how, at its core, retailers make money and how that's changed in the digital age. And so what they're going to need to do to be adapting to succeed in the future. And that has pretty big implications for marketplaces and potentially the classified space. For a long time, retail was about buy low, sell high. And that was enabled because you had a physical store and pricing opacity. Someone shows up in the store, they say, hey, do I want the thing? I might want it. Is it cheaper across town? Hard to know. Not going to go across town. Is it cheaper across country? Almost impossible to know. So that pricing opacity created a reasonable margin on most goods most of the time. Now, that became more challenging in the digital era. As everything's getting listed online, gets priced and available to everybody at all times, data becomes more widely available, pricing margins start to compress. However, along with that digitization came a whole new set of technologies that allow retailers, marketplaces, however you want to think about it, to do new and different things. Access to rich customer data, a known customer, somebody walks in your store, you don't know who they are. They come onto your website, you can actually identify them, you can gather digital identity. The advent of data science and pretty sophisticated machine learning allows you to begin making sense of that data and doing differential things you couldn't do before. And so what you begin to see is folks, what I call making money on the money. This is, are you a fintech at its core? You see in the auto space, and we'll talk a bunch about auto, folks like Carvana and CarMax doing vertical lending. We'll talk about that a bit. But you're also seeing the advent of things like Affirm outside of just auto, where retailers are saying, all right, I'm seeing margin compression on the front end, but I can add value-added services through the financing and money movement. And I think the auto space is a really, really interesting case study for this. Forgive me if this is obvious to a lot of folks in the room, but it's helpful along the way. Someone shows up with a car and says, hey, retailer, you might be Carvana, you might be CarMax, I'd like to buy that thing. It turns out those things, the ASP on that is like 25,000 plus, so most people not walking around with 25,000 in their pocket. The auto retailer space developed point-of-sale lending at a pretty early stage. Effectively a marketplace whereby you say, I want the car, they say, great, we'll get you financing for that. And it's actually a pretty well-developed and sophisticated marketplace in the auto space. That doesn't exist in most retail, but in auto, it's pretty surprising. Through things like Route 1 and DealerTrack, you can get access to a whole bunch of high-quality lenders and do pretty high-velocity contracting. At Shift, we built out entire e-contracting. There were some challenges. Not all the big banks were getting there, but by and large, it's a pretty sophisticated point-of-sale lending machine. And so you hand the customer a loan that has been sourced from a third party. That was, in a lot of ways, I'd argue, invented to some degree in auto and is applying now to more general online retail. So someone shows up, wants to buy something on a retailer's website or a marketplace's website, and you're seeing a whole host of point-of-sale lending where you're basically the retailer's handing them off to someone else, the customer to someone else, that someone underwrites, and they can buy the thing. Now, I think this model is going to change, and it's going to have a pretty big implication for consolidation and transformation around the industry. Increasingly, what we're seeing is when someone shows up to one of a retailer, it could be an iDealer, it could be a traditional dealer, but the large-scale dealers are doing something different and very interesting, and that is they're actually writing the loan themselves. They might write the RIC and go ahead and say, hey, we'll get you the loan, and we'll do the underwriting on our own. That's a big deal, because then what they can do is package up those loans and sell them into ABS markets. So creating their own tranches, not having to have a bank, not having to have a retail deposits base, but being able to do point-of-sale underwriting because there is control and direct interaction with the customer. And in the digital world, getting even better at that, again, because of the machine learning and rich data that I described earlier, makes this not only possible, but highly, highly scalable. And we'll talk in a moment about why that scalability is actually a really big deal. I actually think that this will apply not just in auto retail, but you can flip it to basically any retail category. Anywhere you're seeing things being sold, and particularly where you're seeing things being sold online, you'll see the opportunity to say, hey, we're going to do point-of-sale lending. Instead of handing you off to a third-party lender, we, the retailer, the person who controls that relationship, who has access to the customer data, deep understanding of the asset that they're buying, and either off-the-shelf or homegrown machine learning models to be able to do underwriting, can do those loans and start securitizing. What you have with vertical finance then is a situation where that digital change that made it hard for retailers actually creates a huge advantage. And what is that? The digitization allows scale that you could never get in an individual store. And that scale is incredibly valuable because your cost of capital drops as you go up to larger and larger tranches. If you, as a retailer, you want to start lending in 10, 12, $15 million tranches, think average dealer in the auto ecosystem, pretty hard to get a decent cost of capital at 10, even 50 million. You really need to be lending in 100 million, 200 million, $500 million tranches to be able to get reasonable cost of capital and get that flywheel to work. But if you're originating well and doing that at that scale, you see disproportionate economics. We talked before about how the half of the auto retailer gross profit is coming out of finance. That's by and large in an indirect model, the thing I said earlier, where you're buying from Capital One or Wells Fargo. It becomes much more than half when you're originating yourself. Now, assuming that's happening, what occurs? We talked about the digital landscape creating an environment where you see increasingly transparent prices. In auto, we talk about the metal, front-end margin. So the margin on the metal is under huge pressure, getting pushed down, because everybody can see what that thing's worth. And the advent of car gurus and others will say, hey, is it a good price? Is it not a good price? The front-end transparency creates a lot of compression there. So what you see is the folks who are selling those things start moving to making money on the money. We're already seeing that. It's already half. The question will be, will it be more or less? I would argue it's going to be more and more over time. From there, you notice that the largest players, by verticalizing and getting into lending, not just doing indirect, but actually making this core to the business, start to get higher and higher margins because they're able to get the bigger margins from being at scale. And then the last question is, how do you drive more scale? What's the flywheel, and how does that thing play out? Lower front-end, dropping front-end margins, focusing more and more on the back end, because in effect, you are a fintech player. You're playing at large scale, large volume of transactions, underwriting those things, improving your data, getting a lower cost of capital, and driving a flywheel that lowers increasingly compresses the front end, which makes it harder and harder for small players to compete. If you're in the auto retail case, the average dealer who's selling 50, 70 cars as an independent, you don't have the ability to verticalize. You also don't have the ability to compete on those lower front ends. So you're hurting on the front end, you're hurting on the back end, and what the result is, I believe, will be a flywheel effect that drives consolidation. That doesn't mean there will only be one or two players entirely in the industry. The nature of, say, auto is that there are a lot of cars in a lot of places and a lot of physical distribution. But as we see more and more digital engagement, be it an iDealer, a classified, or a marketplace, I believe this dynamic is going to drive a ton of consolidation, because scale gets you cost of capital gets you better prices gets you more eyeballs and more traffic, and so you see oftentimes winners taking more and more. And that's all I have to say about that.
Do we have Slido questions?
Actually, I intended to leave a decent amount of time for questions because the purpose of this presentation is actually to be provocative and to encourage discussion, believe it or not, more than tell you the answer.
So can I encourage questions? And maybe we start with the top one. What's the difference between vertical financing showcased here and the buy now, pay later systems like Klarna?
Great question. Klarna is essentially a third party, not the retailer themselves. So Klarna is like the bank in the auto space, coming in saying, hey, Klarna will underwrite the customer. It's not vertical because Klarna is not necessarily selling the product. It's indirect because Klarna is saying to the person who's selling the product, let me underwrite that customer, let me insert myself into that transaction. So it's kind of like Klarna is effectively playing the role that a bank would in an indirect dealer transaction.
I'm going to insert a question of mine before we come back to this.
Jonathan's like, all right,
can't wait to ask a question.
Yeah.
But we saw in the real estate market when there was a kind of hiccup in the economy that Zillow found that its models didn't work and it had to withdraw from iBuying. Do you think there's a risk with any of these models that, Carvana, for example, that lends to 80% of its customers, it lends to all credit brackets? Is there a risk in there that at some point, it's going to hit a bump, there's going to come a recession, and we're going to find that lending portfolio is a problem?
That's a great question. That is a fundamental strategic one, and a big reason why the big players, I think, have an advantage. When underwriting a vehicle, you're underwriting two things, the asset and the customer. And what you find is when I think what you're talking about in the market moving,
Yep.
What was moving is the asset prices go sideways. So trying to buy and resell an asset is actually, you're in the finance business. Carvana, as an example, has hundreds and hundreds of millions or billions in floor line financing. So they're constantly making bets on the asset. That core competency can be applied to making bets on the person. At the higher end of FICO, FICO is highly predictable. So a prime customer with a high FICO will perform pretty much as expected FICO.
Can you just explain FICO for those who don't know FICO?
So there's credit scoring models. FICO is one of them. There are many credit scoring models that basically say, based on data that is available to the scoring agencies, how likely is this person, in simple terms, to repay if they're given a loan? And that likelihood, where the data is rich and the person has a strong track record, the FICO becomes very predictable. Like the credit models are good at the high end. But as you move further down into the low end, oftentimes it's not predictable for a bunch of reasons like, hey, we just don't know anything about the person. So the FICO level's low because we just don't know. And so being able to split risk becomes a bigger deal as you go deeper in FICO. I believe that because you have rich data on the user, a Carvana or a retailer can be well positioned to both understand the asset, which they're already doing today, but then understand the person and be able to split risk on the person as well.
Brilliant. So back to the questions here. How do you see this playing out with real estate marketplaces, in particular, new developments, the buying of brand new homes?
So I would be completely speculating if I were to say that I know anything about real estate. I just want to be completely upfront. I can't say that I've thought through real estate. I think that real estate is a unique beast. It's less, I think of it as less as of a retail piece because of the uniqueness. But I think the fundamental principles are at play. If you can gather more information on the asset, gather more information on the user, you're able to split risk in a differential way. If you can do it digitally, you can do it at scale. If you can do it at scale, you can start getting into cost of capital that makes sense through things like securitization, and there's huge opportunity there.
And is securitization, that's like $100 million minimum, is it?
You want it, so securitization, you want to be doing bigger and bigger tranches than that. But to do things like get yourself a warehouse line where you can use to lend, you kind of got to be at the 100 million plus. So it's not a small player's game.
Okay. So to manage the credit risk, what kind of capabilities? I mean, expanding on this top question, it says, do retailers need to build a big credit team? But what other capabilities more broadly do you need to have to do this?
So there are two fundamental things, underwriting and servicing. Depending on the nature of your space and whatnot, you can insource or outsource more or less of that. And one of the biggest things you need is data and building up those data sets over time. I believe that over time, we're going to see more and more off-the-shelf credit models. There are consulting firms that can help you create credit models, and you can learn your way in to the various tranches. Again, FICO, highly predictive of what the individual's going to do at the high end, and then gets less predictive as you go down. You can then start using unique attributes of your platform to understand what splits risk. I mean, the most obvious one on a dealer's website is if somebody's shopping for a red Corvette versus shopping for a gray Toyota Corolla, that behavior is a huge risk splitter. The Corvette driver, believe it or not, is going to be a lot more risky at all FICO levels than that Corolla driver for obvious reasons. Someone buying a fancy sports car versus someone buying a daily commuter. And so that unique data begins to become very useful risk splitting, and you have access to that when you're the, call it, classified marketplace platform retailer.
And does that mean, do you believe the classifieds have better access to that data than the normal lenders like Capital One and Santander and so on?
Well, to take the extreme case, the classifieds are identifying and interacting with a customer well before Capital One is. You saw in the specific case of Capital One, it's a great example of building out effectively its own classified model in the form of Auto Navigator. The idea being, hey, get upstream, start interacting with that customer much earlier in the transaction, lest the customer go to a dealer and then get flipped out of the loan, even if Capital One had interacted with them in the first place. So I do think there's advantages for marketplaces and classifieds that are interacting with customers upstream, because you can begin establishing a relationship and working down through the funnel. That said, I do think, and I think we're seeing this in the presentations, there's convergence happening. The managed marketplace is becoming a destination for a lot of different areas. I don't think that's accidental, and it has to do with working back from the consumer. The consumer doesn't like 12 different handoffs. Consumers want one simple, easy value proposition. It might be that Amazon and Apple and to some degree Google kind of spoiled consumers, so to speak, but that's what we all expect now. And that's an unfortunate and inescapable reality, particularly in the US. And so I think we're going to see more and more of the demand for that, which means we're going to see convergence on that more managed marketplace experience.
So can digital and fintech services like Shopify help smaller retailers compete against the large integrated players like Amazon? I presume there's a read across in this question from classifieds helping maybe compete against the Kavanas and the Kazoos.
I think there's a degree to which yes, and I think there will be opportunities for the Shopifys to do aggregation, and I also think there's going to be an opportunity for companies to do synthetic scale, i.e. the capital is the problem, and being able to get capital at low cost at scale is the problem. So there is an opportunity to try and do that across a bunch of different players. It's a little bit harder though, because you're disaggregating. And when you're able to lump together the data and get integrated insights, it'll be more powerful. And there is all about becoming a destination. I think it's really important to say when the small players are facing compressing front-end margins or compressing prices, and they're struggling to keep up, you're seeing the large players both become a destination and get advantage from the scale, which just has a pretty powerful consolidation aspect.
So in the case of autos, isn't the ultimate vertical integration going to be driven by the OEMs and how they innovate on the direct-to-consumer relationship? And isn't that what we're already beginning to see, say, with Heycar in Europe and the finance arms, the captive finance arms, reaching into the used car marketplace?
I've always done used cars, so I haven't done new cars, but I look at the way OEMs operate and the level of complexity that they have to deal with. And don't get me wrong, I admire what Tesla's trying to do in terms of fully integrating. I'm not sure OEMs are necessarily built to be large-scale customer-facing interaction models. I think that it is theoretically possible, but there is a ton of local logistics that goes on around a vehicle, for example. And trying to handle those local logistics, certainly in an internal combustion engine, that may change as we move into literally simpler machines with electric vehicles. I'm not sure that it's an obvious win that OEMs are going to be able to really vertically integrate the end-to-end on the entire thing, but it's to some degree a possibility.
Okay, so we've got 42 seconds left. How do you go about making credit scoring and risk analysis when you become a lender? Can you do that in 42 seconds? It seems like a... 5 minutes still. Oh, brilliant. Good.
Well, there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. Like I said, there are credit models you can buy off the shelf. You can hire talent that can help you with it. But one of the classic ways is you start in places where something like FICO is more predictable. You'd start in prime and near prime, and then work your way down the spectrum. That's a, like, not uncommon way of approaching it. You also see players like, you've already seen Amazon issue a private label card, and so they're essentially outsourcing, but trying to associate with brand and learn from the exercise of point of sale lending. And so there are stages and steps you can take to get deeper and deeper into point of sale lending before you fully verticalize that thing.
And it's worth saying that Auto Hero in Germany has started with premium lending only and is gradually kind of expanding its model out in exactly that way. What drives the cost of, I presume by ABS we mean asset-based finance? Is it only scale, or is it also the quality of the asset?
So quality of assets is really important. We learned this in the mortgage crisis. And asset-backed securities works around being able to lump up to a bunch of different individual assets, like a lot of different auto loans. Scale is really important for two reasons. One, you need like a warehouse line so you can do the lending in the first place, because you want to build up that base of assets before you then sell it into a securities market. Second, when you're going to the securities market, you can't just go in with like super small tranches, because the doing of the transaction is, in and of itself, there's friction. So you need to go in with larger pools and build a reputation for quality assets, which means you're getting larger volume of buyers who are willing to buy at more advantaged prices. So there's kind of scale advantages at multiple stages of that thing.
So can you share a bit on the Shift business case? And am I right in thinking the Shift business case is shifting as well, because you bought the Fair technology and so on?
So I need to be really careful. When we took Shift public at the end of 2020, I got a ton of training from the lawyers on insider information and not put me or put you in jail. Our CFO gave a quote, and he said, "Toby, I don't look good in orange, and I don't think any of the rest of the executive team should, so let's not do that." So I'm going to be careful not to put anybody in here in orange. Fair's color is orange. We bought a company called Fair. It has been talked about as a marketplace. I do think that a lot of the things that we're seeing here align with where the market is headed, and that is, you've seen Carvana do third-party listings. I think it's very reasonable to expect that a lot of the iDealers are going to be going in that direction. If you look at Amazon, that's like the classic use case. They started out with 80–90% of what they sold on Amazon being first party. Now the vast majority of what is sold on Amazon is third party, not accidental. Becoming a platform rather than simply an internet-enabled retailer is kind of a destination for just about everybody.
So are we okay still for... is there an example of marketplaces as high-volume players making money on the financing themselves instead of providing leads?
Yes. So Javier, I think that's like the core. I think it's the same that asset. That's exactly right. The core of it is, rather than providing leads in the case of auto to banks, it's saying, "Hey, I'm going to do the lending myself, and by doing the lending myself, and then packaging up those loans and selling them off, I'm actually going to take out a different middleman, the bank, and access capital directly and become a conduit for capital to consumer." And that's a tremendous opportunity. That's sort of the core of where I think this thing's going. And then the question is, what's the impact of that? And I think the impact of that is the consolidation.
So I'm going to pick the one at the bottom here that's just come up. How do you see public auto retailers how do you see public auto retailer used car platforms like Driveway from the US dealer Lithia and EchoPark from Sonic playing out in the space? Do you think they're going to be credible competitors to Vroom and Shift and Carvana?
So I make a habit of not kind of directly commenting on individual other players in the space. I think what we're seeing, and I'll step back and say, what we're seeing in terms of the gravity of the marketplace is something like 95% of consumers start their retail journey in auto online. I mean, that's an astounding number. And until 3 or 4 years ago, something like 98–99% of those consumers ended their auto retail journey at a store. Very few industries, if any, see that kind of channel switching. That's like uncanny. Maybe surgery, I suppose, where like you have to end the surgery online or offline. But it's extraordinary, and this is where the classifieds, I think, taught an incredible lesson to the industry. It is extraordinary that all the demand is online and all the fulfillment is happening not online. And I think players like the ones you guys mentioned are very aware of that. And they see it as an absolute imperative to say, wow, if all the customers are over there and I'm over here, I need to get into the channel where they are and be able to keep a customer. And this is sort of the history of most consumer. I want to keep that customer in the channel of their choice for as long as I possibly can. Because channel switching causes significant friction. And so, that was true in banking. I think it's true in auto. I think it's going to be true in just about any consumer retailer funnel-based game. So I would expect those guys to go hard at it.
But taking away from those individual players, I mean, do you think that dealers at scale can compete effectively against the specialists?
I think there was a good argument made earlier about CarMax and saying, hey, there's a bunch of fulfillment centers. Wow, if you look at that CarMax map we saw and you look at that Kazoo map we saw, there's some very interesting analogies because you have to physically distribute goods. I do think that there is a lot of advantage to having that retail infrastructure, and the question is, how do you leverage that in order to be able to create an at-scale integrated experience? Some will be better at that than others. CarMax has been I think pretty much organically built all the way through. Many other dealer groups have been built up through acquisitions and have a lot of system challenges and a lot of difficulty getting from here to there. The obvious elephant in the room is, you look at a CarMax, and I think we did the same thing at Shift. It's true at Carvana and Vroom. There's a no haggle pricing policy. It turns out it's kind of really hard to haggle in a digital format. If you're a dealer group that's built deeply on the front end haggling, and you're deeply disintegrated or broken out into lots of different dealer elements that operate in different ways, it's, I think, going to be a lot harder to get from here to there on the unified online at scale aspect than it would be if you have a little bit better integration. But we're going to see it play out for different players along the way, and I think that better unified aspect is going to be a big advantage.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
really
thank you, John.
appreciate
Thank you all.